Testing, testing. Mikal Dars is such a nice person.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. تبارك الذي بيده الملك وهو على كل شيء قدير. الذي خلق الموت والحياة ليبلوكم أيكم أحسن عملا وهو العزيز الغفور. الذي خلق 7 سماوات طباقا ما ترى في خلق الرحمن من تفاوت فارجع البصر هل ترى من فطور ثم ارجع البصر كرتين ينقلب إليك البصر خاسئا وهو حسير. ولقد زينا السماء الدنيا بمصابيح وجعلناها رجوما للشياطين وأعتدنا لهم عذاب السعير. وللذين كفروا بربهم عذاب جهنم وبئس المصير. إذا ألقوا فيها سمعوا لها شيئا وهي تفور تكاد تميز من الغيظ كلما ألقي فيها فوج سألهم خزنتها ألم يأتكم نذير قالوا بلى قد جاءنا نذير فكذبنا وقلنا ما نزل الله من شيء إن أنتم إلا في ضلال كبير. وقالوا لو كنا نسمع أو نعقل ما كنا في أصحاب السعير فاعترفوا بذنبهم فسحقا لأصحاب السعير. إن الذين يخشون ربهم بالغيب لهم مغفرة وأجر كبير. وأسروا قولكم أو اجهروا به إنه عليم بذات الصدور. ألا يعلم من خلق وهو اللطيف الخبير. هو الذي جعل لكم الأرض ذلولا فامشوا في مناكبها وكلوا من رزقه وإليه النشور. أأمنتم من في السماء أن يخسف بكم الأرض فإذا هي تمور أم أمنتم من في السماء أن يرسل عليكم حاصبا فستعلمون كيف نذير. ولقد كذب الذين من قبلهم فكيف كان نكير. أولم يروا إلى الطير فوقهم صافات ويقبضن ما يمسكوهن إلا الرحمن إنه بكل شيء بصير. أمن هذا الذي هو جند لكم ينصركم من دون الرحمن إن الكافرون إلا في غرور. أمن هذا الذي يرزقكم إن أمسك رزقه بل لجوا في عتو ونفور. أفمن يمشي مكبا على وجهه أهدى أمن يمشي سويا على صراط مستقيم. قل هو الذي أنشأكم وجعل لكم السمع والأبصار والأفئدة قليلا ما تشكرون. قل هو الذي ذرأكم في الأرض وإليه تحشرون ويقولون متى هذا الوعد إن كنتم صادقين قل إنما العلم عند الله وإنما أنا نذير مبين فلما رأوا زلفة سيئت وجوه الذين كفروا وقيل هذا الذي كنتم به تدعون قل أرأيتم إن أهلكني الله ومن معي أو رحمنا فمن يجير الكافرين من عذاب عليم قل هو الرحمن آمنا به وعليه توكلنا فستعلمون من هو في ضلال مبين قل أرأيتم إن أصبح ماؤكم غورا فمن يأتيكم بماء معين صدق الله العلي العظيم اللهم صل على رحم الله من قرأ سورة مباركة الفاتحة
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد اللهم إني أسألك برحمتك التي وسعت كل شيء وبقوتك التي قهرت بها كل شيء وخضع لها كل شيء وذل لها كل شيء وبجبروتك التي غلبت بها كل شيء وبعزتك التي لا يقوم لها شيء وبعظمتك التي ملأت كل شيء وبسلطانك الذي على كل شيء وبوجهك الباقي بعد فناء كل شيء وبأسمائك التي ملأت أركان كل شيء وبعلمك الذي أحاط بكل شيء وبنور وجهك الذي أضاء له كل شيء يا نور يا قدوس يا أول الأولين ويا آخر الآخرين اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحتك العصم اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل النقم اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تغير النعم اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحبس الدعاء اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل البلاء اللهم اغفر لي كل ذنب أذنبته وكل خطيئة أخطأتها اللهم إني أتقرب إليك بذكرك وأستشفئ بك إلى نفسك وأسألك بجودك أن تدنيني من كربك وأن توزعني شكرك وأن تلحمني ذكرك اللهم إني أسألك سؤال خاضع متذلل خاشع أن تسامحني وترحمني وتجعلني بقسمك راضيا قانئا وفي جميع الأحوال متواضعا. اللهم وأسألك سؤال من اشتدت فاقته وأنزل بك عند الشدائد حاجته وأذم فيما عندك رغبته. اللهم عظم سلطانك وعلى مكانك وخفي مكرك وظهر أمرك وغلب قهرك وجرت قدرتك ولا يمكن الفرار من حكومتك. اللهم لا أجد لذنوبي غافرا ولا لقبائه ساترا ولا لشيء من عملي القبيح بالحسن مبدلا غيرك. لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك وبحمدك ظلمت نفسي وتجرعت بجهلي وسقنت إلى قديم ذكرك لي ومنك علي. اللهم مولاي كم من كبيه سترته وكم من فاده من البلاء يقلته وكم من إثار وقيته وكم من مكروه دفعته وكم من ثناء جميل لست أهلا له نشرته. اللهم عظم بلائي وأفرط بي سوء حالي وكسرت بي أعمالي وقعدت بي أغلالي وحبسني عن نفع بعد عملي وخدعتني الدنيا بغرورها ونفسي بجنايتها ومثالي يا سيدي. فأسألك بعزتك أن لا يحجب عنك دعائي سوء عملي وفعالي ولا تفضحني بخفي ما اطلعت عليه من سري ولا تعاجلني بالعقوبة على ما عملته في خلواتي من سوء فعلي وإساءتي ودوام تفريطي وجهالتي وكثرة شهواتي وغفلتي. وكن اللهم بعزتك لي في كل الأحوال رعوفا وعلي في جميع الأمور عطوفا. إلهي ورب من لي غيرك أسأله كشف الضر والنظر في أمري. إلهي ومولاي أجريت علي حكما اتبعت فيه هوى نفسي ولم أحترس فيه من تزيين عدوي فغرني بما أهوى وأسعده على ذلك القضاء فتجاوزت بما جرى علي من ذلك بعد حدودك وخالفت بعد أوامرك. فلك الحمد علي في جميع ذلك ولا حجة لي فيما جرى علي فيه قضاؤك وألزمني حكمك وبلاؤك. وقد أتيتك يا إلهي بعد تقصيري وإسرافي على نفسي معتذرا نادما منكسرا مستقيلا مستغفرا منيبا مقرا مذعنا معترفا لا أجد مفرا مما كان مني ولا مفزعا أتوجه إليه في أمري غير قبولك عذري وإدخالك إياي في سعة من رحمتك. اللهم فاقبل عذري وارحم شدة ذري وفكني من شد وثاكي. يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني ورقة جلدي ودقة عظمي. يا من بدأ خلقي وذكري تربيتي وبري وتغذيتي حبني لابتداء كرمك وسالف برك بي. يا إلهي وسيدي وربي أتراك معذب بنارك بعد توحيدك وبعد ما انطوى عليه قلبي من معرفتك ولهج به لسانك من ذكرك واعتقده ضميري من حبك وبعد صدق اعتراف ودعاء خاضعا لربوبيتك. هيهات أنت أكرم من أن تضيء من ربيت أو تبعد من أدنيت أو تشرد من آويت أو تسلم إلى البلاء من كفيته ورحمته. وليت الشعر يا سيدي وإلهي ومولاي أتسلط النار على وجوه خرت لعظمتك ساجدا وعلى ألسن نطقت بتوحيدك صادقا وبشكرك مادحا وعلى قلوب اعترفت بإلهيتك محققا وعلى ضمائر حوت من العلم بك حتى صارت خاشعا وعلى جوارها سعت إلى أوطان تعبدك طاعئة وأشارت باستغفارك مذئنا. ما هكذا الظن بك ولا أخبرنا بفضلك عنك يا كريم. يا ربي وأنت تعلم ضعفي عن قليل من بلاء الدنيا وعقوباتها وما يجري فيها من المكاره على أهلها، على أن ذلك بلاء مكروه قليل مكثه يسير بقاؤه قصير مدته، فكيف احتمالي لبلاء الآخرة وجليل وقوع المكاره فيها، وهو بلاء تطول مدته ويدوم مقامه ولا يخفف عن أهله، لأنه لا يكون إلا عن غضبك وانتقامك وسخطك، وهذا ما لا تقوم له السماوات والأرض. يا سيدي فكيف لي وأنا عبدك الضعيف الضليل الحقير المسكين المستقيم. يا إلهي وربي وسيدي ومولاي، لأي الأمور إليك أشكو ولما منها عذج وأبكي، لعليم العذاب والشدة أم لطول البلاء ومدتي؟ فلئن سيرتني للعقوبات مع أعدائك وجمعت بيني وبين أهل بلائك وفرقت بيني وبين أحبائك وأوليائك، فهبني يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي ورب صبرت على عذابك، فكيف أصبر على فراقك؟ وهبني صبرت على حر نارك، فكيف أصبر عن النظر إلى كرامتك؟ أم كيف أسكن في النار ورجاء أفوك؟ فبعزتك يا سيدي ومولاي أقسم صادقا لئن تركتني ناطقا لأذجنك إليك بين أهلها ضجيج الآملين، ولأصرخن إليك صراخ المستصرخين، ولأبكين عليك بكاء الفاقدين، ولأنادينك أين كنت يا ولي المؤمنين. يا غاية آمال العارفين، يا غياث المستغيثين، يا حبيب قلوب الصادقين، ويا إله العالمين، أفتراك سبحانك يا إلهي وبحمدك تسمع فيها صوت عبد مسلم سجن فيها بمخالفته وذاق طعم عذابها بمعصيته وحبس بين أطباقها بجرمه وجريرته، وهو يذج إليك ضجيج معمل لرحمتك ويناديك بلسان أهل توحيدك ويتوسل إليك بربوبيتك. يا مولاي فكيف يبقى في العذاب وهو يرجو ما سلف من حلمك؟ أم كيف تؤلمه النار وهو يعمل فضلك ورحمتك؟ أم كيف يحرقه لهيبها وأنت تسمع صوته وترى مكانه؟ أم كيف يشتمل عليه زفيرها وأنت تعلم ضعفه؟ أم كيف يتقلقل بين أتباكها وأنت تعلم صدقه؟ أم كيف تزجره زبانيتها وهو يناديك يا ربه؟ أم كيف يرجو فضلك في عتقه منها فتتركه فيها. هيهات ما ذلك الظن بك، ولا المعروف من فضلك، ولا مشبه لما عاملت به الموحدين من برك وإحسانك. فباليقين أقطع لولا ما حكمت به من تعذيب جاحديك، وقضيت به من إخلاد معانديك، لجعلت النار كل بردا وسلامة. وما كان لأحد فيها مقرا ولا مقاما، لكنك تقدست أسماؤك، أقسمت أن تملأها من الكافرين من الجنة والناس أجمعين، وأن تخلد فيها المعاندين، وأن تجل ثناؤك قلت مبتدئا، وتطولت بالعنآم متقرما. أفمن كان مؤمنا كمن كان فاسقا لا يستوون. إلهي وسيدي، فأسألك بالقدرة التي قدرتها، وبالقضية التي حتمتها وحكمتها وغلبت من عليه أجريتها، أن تهب لي في هذه الليلة وفي هذه الساعة كل جرم أجرمته، وكل ذنب أذنبته، وكل كبيه أسررته، وكل جهل عملته كتمته أو أعلنته، أخفيته أو أظهرته، وكل سيئة أمرت بإثباتها الكرام الكاتبين الذين وكلتهم بحفظ ما يكون مني، وجعلتهم شهودا علي مع جوارحي، وكنت أنت الرقيب علي من ورائهم والشاهد لما خفي عنهم، وبرحمتك أخفيته، وبفضلك سترته، وأن توفر حظ من كل خير أنزلته، أو إحسان فضلته، أو بر نشرته، أو رزق بسطته، أو ذنب تغفره، أو خطأ تستره. يا ربي يا ربي يا رب، يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي ومالك رقي، يا من بيده ناصيتي، يا عليما بذري ومسكنتي، يا خبيرا بفقري وفاقتي، يا ربي يا ربي يا رب، أسألك بحقك وقدسك وعظم صفاتك وأسمائك أن تجعل أوقات من الليل والنهار بذكرك معمورة، وبخدمتك موصولة، وأعمال عندك مقبولة، حتى تكون أعمالي وأورادي كلها وردا واحدا، وحال في خدمتك سرمدا. يا سيدي، يا من عليه مؤولي، يا من إليه شكوت أحوالي، يا ربي يا ربي يا رب، قوي على خدمتك جوارحي، واشدد على العظيمة جوانحي، وحبلي الجد في خشيتك والدوام في الاتصال بخدمتك، حتى أسرح إليك في ميادين السابكين، وأسرع إليك في المبارزين، واشتاق إلى قربك في المشتاقين، وأدنو منك دنو المخلصين، وخافك مخافة المؤمنين، وأجتمع في جوارك مع المؤمنين. اللهم ومن أرادني بسوء فأعرض، ومن كادني فكد، واجعلني من أحسن عبيدك نصيبا عندك، وأقربهم منزلة منك، وأخصهم زلفة لديك، فإنه لا ينال ذلك إلا بفضلك، وجد لي بجودك، واعطف علي بمجدك، واحفظني برحمتك، واجعلني لساني بذكرك لهجا، وقلبي بحبك متيما، ومن علي بحسن إجابتك، وأكلني أثرتي، واغفر ذلتي، فإنك قضيت على عبادك بإبادتك، وأمرتهم بدعائك، وضمنت لهم الإجابة. فإليك يا ربي نسبت وجهي، وإليك يا ربي مددت يدي، فبعزتك استجب لي دعائي، وبلغني مناي. ولا تقطع من فضلك رجائي واكفني شر الجن والإنس من أعدائي يا سريع الرضا اغفر لمن لا يملك إلا الدعاء فإنك فعال لما تشاء يا من اسمه دواء وذكره شفاء وطاعته غنى ارحم من رأس ماله الرجاء وسلاهه البكاء يا سابغ النعم يا دافع النقام يا نور المستوحشين في الظلام يا علما لا يعلم صل على محمد وآل محمد وافعل بما أنت أهله وصلى الله على رسوله والأئمة الميامين من آله وسلم تسليما كثيرا كثيرا اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد رحم الله من قرأ الفاتحة
الفاتحہ. بر محمد و آل محمد صلوات. کہاں جاہے آخر بیابان ہر سو شکستہ ہے پہلو اکیلی ہے زہرا. کہاں جائے آخر بیابان ہر سو شکستہ ہے پہلو اکیلی ہے زہرا. رونے پپہرا مصائب کا سہرا اکیلی ہے زہرا اکیلی ہے زہرا. در فاطمہ کو جلایا ہے تم نے کیا وعدہ اپنا بھلایا ہے تم نے. تماچے نہ مارو مسلمان جاؤ علی کو بلاؤ اکیلی ہے زہرا. رونے پپہرا مصائب کا سہرا اکیلی ہے زہرا. بیاں کس سے جا کر کروں درد اپنا ہے غیروں کی دنیا نہیں کوئی اپنا. کوئی جا کے بابا سے کہہ دو یہ جا کر کہ لے جاؤ آ کر اکیلی ہے زہرا. رونے پپہرا مصائب کا سہرا اکیلی ہے زہرا. اے لخت جگر حسن ابن حیدر یہ نانا کے پہلو میں
سونے نہ دے اگر تم آ جانا پہلو میں، سو جانا ماں کے بکی میں، یہاں پر اکیلی ہے زہرا، رونے پپیرا مصائب کا سہرا، اکیلی ہے زہرا۔ شہ کربلا نے کارو کے ماں سے، یہ مظلوم بیٹے نے مظلوم ماں سے، اکیلا ہوں میں بھی اکیلی ہے زینب، اکیلے ہے بابا اکیلی ہے زہرا، رونے پپیرا مصائب کا سہرا، اکیلی ہے زہرا۔ سر مرگ اختر تھا زہرا کا نوحہ، کب آؤ گے مہدی کب آؤ گے بیٹا، خدا کے لیے اب یہ پردہ ہٹا دو، چلے آؤ آؤ اکیلی ہے زہرا، رونے پپیرا مصائب کا سہرا، اکیلی ہے زہرا، اکیلی ہے زہرا، اکیلی ہے زہرا۔ بر محمد و آل محمد صلوات۔ الفاتحہ۔
Sheikh Azhar Nasser, my respected elders, brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Surah Fatiha is requested for the marhumeen's names listed on the screen and all the marhumeen. Al-Fatiha. Dua Shafa Maries is requested for the names listed on the screen and whoever is ill here and elsewhere around the world. Let's recite together. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Amma yujibul mustarra iza da'ahu yakshifu su. 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 Now let's welcome Sheikh Azhar Nasser to recite tonight's Majlis. Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على خاتم الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين، صلى الله عليه وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين. صلى الله عليك يا رسول الله، صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله، غريب يا مظلوم تمسك بكم وأمنا من لجأ إليكم يا ليتنا فيا ليتنا كنا معكم سيدي فنفوز والله فوزا عظيما. قال تعالى في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وآت ذا القربى حقا. صدق الله العلي العظيم. أقرأ دعاءكم وزين مجالسكم ذكر الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. Respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salatu wa salam, beloved daughter of the Prophet, delivered 2 public sermons in her entire life. Lady Fatima alayhi salam was an influential personality, but yet you see that she made very few public appearances. This is why, with her life, she delivers only 2 public services. And the most famous of those 2 sermons is the Fadak sermon itself. And the second sermon that she delivered was a sermon that she gave when the women of the Muhajirin and the Azhar visited her when she became ill in her final days. Now, in order for us to appreciate the theological and the historical significance of the Fadak sermon, we have to understand and we have to speak a little bit about those 2 words. But without understanding what Fadak is, the sermon of Fadak remains decontextualized. So in order for us to understand and appreciate what this sermon was all about and why it is of paramount theological significance, we have to shed some light on the history of Islam leading up to the possession of Fadak by the Holy Prophet ﷺ. Now, unfortunately, to most Muslims around the world, if you ask your average Muslim who's relatively well-read, they assume that Fadak was a legal dispute over a plot of land between the daughter of the Prophet and the first Khalifa, and the first Khalifa had to make a difficult decision and had to rule against the daughter of the Prophet. Because, as we'll come to see, the argument that he makes is that he allegedly heard the Prophet say that نحن معاشر الأنبياء لا نورث, that we, the prophets, the messengers of God, do not leave an inheritance. What we leave behind is charity. So, to many Muslims, Fadak is just a simple legal dispute over a plot of land that Fatima felt that she had a right over, while Abu Bakr felt that even though you're the daughter of the Prophet, even though we respect you, justice dictates that this is for the Muslim Ummah. This is public property. Now, when you look at the statements of Ahlul Bayt, when you look at the content of Al-Khutbah Al-Fadakiyah, when you look at what Fatima al-Zahra says in that sermon, you'll understand that Fadak it's not about an argument over a piece of land. Fadak, my dear brothers and sisters, is a reminder of the constant struggle
between truth and falsehood. Fadak is much deeper than a plot of land. Fadak is the story of Musa and Fir'aun. Fadak is the story of Ibrahim and Numrud. Fadak is the story of Habil and Qabil. Fadak is about the preservation of truth. It's about legitimate governance after the Prophet. And inshallah, we'll shed some more light on this. Now, why is Fatima al-Zahra so adamant about this plot of land? Some may read her insistence on retaining ownership of Fadak as, her desire to secure worldly resources, to secure her financial future and the financial future of her progeny. But we have to remember who we're talking about. Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam has never shown an interest in dunya. This is the same Fatima that when she was only 5 or 6 years old, when the Muslims were boycotted in Mecca, she was the one, and there was limited food. She was the one who was looking after the Prophet. Usually a young girl, 5, 6 years old, 7 years old maximum, if they're experiencing economic sanctions, usually such a girl would need to be looked after. She would need to be taken care of. But you see with Lady Fatima alayhi salam, even at a young age, she was always thinking about others. And this is when she was given the honorific title of Abiha. This is the same Fatima that when Hassan and Hussein became ill, her and her husband Amir al-Mu'mineen, they made a nadhr to fast for 3 days. And they gave their iftar to the poor, to the orphan, to the captive. She went hungry to ensure that others were fed. So to claim that Fadak is Fatima al-Zahra's way of clinging on to a parcel of land is a misrepresentation of who Fatima is. Fatima al-Zahra is the one who gave her wedding dress away to a poor woman. Fatima al-Zahra, salamullahi alayha, she's the one who gave her necklace away that Fatima bint Asad gave to her as a wedding gift. It was very easy for her to part with this dunya. So when Fatima al-Zahra is insisting on her ownership of a plot of land, we need to understand that this has nothing to do with dunya. Her insistence on a parcel of land must have greater significance. This must be something related to deen, to Islam itself. Why was Amir al-Mu'mineen so insistent on Fadak being returned to Fatima? Was Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam interested in real estate? This is the same Imam who used to say, Ya dunya ghurri ghayri, O world, go deceive someone else. فَقَدْ طَلَّقْتُكِ ثَلَاثًا. Amir al-Mu'mineen, he says that I have divorced you 3 times. There is no coming back to Ali ibn Abi Talib. This is Amir al-Mu'mineen. Amir al-Mu'mineen, he divorces dunya 3 times. You and I, we get married to dunya 3 times. Even when dunya turns away from us, we chase after it. Amir al-Mu'mineen says, go find someone else. What does Ali have to do with a transient world? So you see, when you take these personalities, the zuhd of Lady Fatima, the zuhd of Amir al-Mu'mineen, individuals who lived a very simple life, when Ali and Fatima are demanding this piece of land, when they're claiming it, that this belongs to us, we have to know that this has nothing to do with the pursuit of dunya. There's something deeper here. Now, in order for us to understand the significance of Fadak, and in order for us to appreciate the message in Fatimah al-Zahra's sermon, we have to understand a little bit about the history of Islam. How was Fadak acquired? And when was Fadak transferred? When was the ownership of this land transferred to Fatimah al-Zahra? And how did the government that formed after the death of the Prophet, how did they confiscate it? And what were the events that transpired after that? Now, as many of you know, the Prophet ﷺ begins his prophetic mission in Mecca. He spends 13 years. After he loses his uncle Abu Talib and Khadija, he's vulnerable to his enemies. There's a plot to assassinate him, and he makes his hijrah. Now, when he arrives in Medina, which was called Yathrib at the time, Yathrib was a religiously pluralistic city. So you have mushrikeen who live there, you have Muslims who live there, and you have Jews who live there. Now the question that arises here is that why do we see Jews living in Yathrib? Why are they living in the Arabian Peninsula? So you see a Jewish diaspora in this region. Now, in the Quran and in our ahadith, it mentions that there were pockets of Jewish settlements throughout Arabia, specifically in Yathrib and in the outskirts of Yathrib. And the reason why these Jews settled in these, arid deserts is because it was written in their scriptures that the final messenger of God would appear in the Arab lands. And therefore you find that many of the Jews were willing to settle in these foreign territories, in the most inhospitable places, just to await the appearance of the final messenger of God. And brothers and sisters, as I was reflecting on this shows us, how committed some of these Jews were. Believe me, they were more committed to their religious tradition than you and I. I mean, the Jews in Medina, they were essentially in a state of intidhar. Right? You and I, as 12 Shias, we claim to be in a state of intidhar. We are anticipating the reappearance of the 12th Imam. The Jews in Medina were anticipating the advent of the Prophet. But you see that they're actually willing to go and live in the place that he's going to reappear. I mean, how many of us, this is like you and I, packing up and leaving the comfort of our home and the luxuries of living in the West, and we go and settle in a hostile city like Mecca, a very, anti-Shia city like Mecca. Or we go and we settle in, a war-torn country like Iraq. We go to Kufa and we settle there. And we endure the hardships, all for the sake of being in the same place that Allah's Hujjah will be. So these were the Jews. And the Quran in Surah Al-Baqarah, Surah 2, verse 89, whenever the mushrikeen used to bully them and give them a hard time, Allah mentions the response of these Jews. وَكَانُوا مِن قَبْلُ يَسْتَفْتِحُونَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا. The Jews, they would always remind the mushrikeen that one day we will have the upper hand over you. Meaning that when the final messenger of God appears, we will have the upper hand. We will conquer these areas. because they knew that this final messenger of God, his empire would be vast and he would conquer these surrounding areas. فَلَمَّا جَاءَهُمْ مَا عَرَفُوا كَفَرُوا بِهِ. But when that which they knew came to them, they rejected it. Because to the Jews, the final messenger of God has to be a Jew. He can't be a Gentile. He can't be a non-Jewish prophet. So you see people who are devout, who made all of these sacrifices, who were willing to live in the most inhospitable areas of Arabia. Allah tested them. That the prophet, he's not from the same, background that you expected. He's not Jewish. Some of us, when the Imam reappears, we might have some preconceived ideas about what the Imam should do. And some of us will abandon him because he doesn't fit in the box that we created for him. I can imagine there were many Muslims who were very happy to give bay'ah to Amir al-Mu'mineen after the assassination of Uthman. They thought that, yes, finally Amir al-Mu'mineen, the commander of the faithful, is going to rule and peace is going to prevail and we're going to live in a utopian society. But when Amir al-Mu'mineen comes to power, what happens during those 4 years? He has to fight 3 civil wars. I can imagine that many people thought to themselves that ever since Ali ibn Abi Talib came to power, it's been nothing but bloodshed and chaos and instability. We have to learn how to submit. Sometimes we have false expectations of prophets and imams, and when they don't measure up to our standards and our expectations, we turn away from them. So in reality, we're not looking to them for guidance. We've already decided what the straight path is, and we expect the prophets and the imams to walk on that imaginary path. But the reality is that we need to follow them. So in any case, you have these Jewish settlements throughout Arabia. In Yathrib, one of the most powerful Jewish strongholds was in Khaybar. And then you have Fadak. And of course, Fadak was the most fertile of lands because of the presence of water. So Fadak was really one of the best agricultural sites, one of the best Jewish agricultural settlements. So again, we know in Medina, the Prophet has to fight one battle after another, and the Prophet establishes the constitution of the Medina Charter, which is an agreement with the Jews in Medina. At least part of it is an agreement, a treaty with them, that they shall not support any of the Prophet's enemies, that they have a common duty to protect the city of Medina, and the Prophet outlines a number of clauses in that social contract. Now, unfortunately, many, if not most, of the Jewish tribes in Medina, they began to conspire against the Prophet. They began to collude against the Prophet, collude with the mushrikeen. So the Prophet ﷺ gathers intelligence, and it becomes evident. He has evidence that the Jewish tribes, many of them in Medina, had committed treason, essentially. So the Prophet ﷺ, in the 7th year after the Hijrah, he goes to the strongest Jewish fortress in Khaybar, and many of you, we know the story about what happened in that battle. The narrations mention very clearly that the Prophet first sends Abu Bakr. He goes, he fails, and when he returns, his soldiers call him a coward, and he calls his soldiers a coward. So here, the military commander is being called a coward, and the military commander is calling his soldiers cowards. In any case, it was a colossal failure. The Prophet then sends Umar ibn al-Khattab. He goes, again, fails. And the narrations say, يُجَبِّنُونَهُ وَيُجَبِّنُوهُ, that he calls them cowards and they call him a coward. So again, it was a failure. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he says, لَأُعْطِيَنَّ الرَّايَةَ غَدًا رَجُلًا يُحِبُّ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ وَيُحِبُّهُ اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ. The Prophet ﷺ, he says, listen, this job has to be finished. Tomorrow I will give the standard to a man. And the fact, the Prophet, what does he say? He uses the word rajul. I'm going to give it to a man who loves God and his messenger. And God and his messenger loves him. Karraran ghayr farrar. Someone who is not going to retreat because the others retreated. Now, the narrations say that the Sahaba had a sleepless night. They were all anxious. And the reason why they were so excited and anxious is because they assumed that Ali ibn Abi Talib is sick. So it's not going to be Ali ibn Abi Talib, it's going to be one of us. So they stayed up that night guessing, is it me? Maybe it's you. So the Prophet ﷺ, in the morning, the companions, they gather around the Prophet. And the Prophet, he says, Ayna Ali ibn Abi Talib? Where's Ali? They say, Ya Rasulullah, Ali ibn Abi Talib has an eye ailment. He cannot see. The Prophet, what does he say? Oh, okay, let's find someone else. He says, bring him. Bring Ali. The Prophet ﷺ, he takes some of his saliva and he wipes his blessed saliva, wipes it on the eyes of Ali. His vision is restored. And to make a long story short, he conquers Khaybar. And the most decorated warrior of Khaybar, of the Jews, the hero of the Jews, Marhab, was literally split in half by Ali ibn Abi Talib. Now, when news reaches, because news travels fast, the Prophet ﷺ has conquered Khaybar. Do you know what that means, brothers and sisters? That means that the Prophet can conquer any of these Jewish strongholds. And Ali and they all of them received the news. Now, it's not only that Marhab was killed. News started to spread that Ali ibn Abi Talib ripped open. He took the gate of Khaybar off of its hinges. Not only that, he cut Marhab in half. People would be afraid of you if you wounded Marhab. Ali ibn Abi Talib split him into two. So news spreads and the Jewish tribes are in a panic. This is not a joke. When the Prophet says that he's going to punish those who committed treason, he means business. Now, so the Jews in Fadak, so Khaybar was conquered, and Khaybar was conquered under the leadership of Ali ibn Abi Talib, and there was an army with him. So therefore, based on fiqh, the spoils of war, the spoils of Khaybar are distributed, right? Because it was conquered with a Muslim army. Now Fadak, the Jews in Fadak, they become nervous because the Prophet says that they're next. Now the Prophet doesn't send an army. He doesn't need to send an army. He sends one man because this one man is an army in and of himself. He sends Ali ibn Abi Talib. Go. Amir al-Mu'mineen goes to Fadak. He jumps the fortress. When they see Ali ibn Abi Talib, the one who killed Marhab, they say, we surrender. We're willing to give Muhammad whatever he wants. We give him, as a peace settlement, we give him all of Fadak, the orchards of Fadak. Now, Fadak was not conquered with a Muslim army. So why is that significant? Because if it was conquered with a Muslim army, that means it would be Fay'ul Muslimin. It would become the property of all Muslims. But the Prophet sends Ali ibn Abi Talib on his behalf, and they surrender Fadak without any fighting. Now, when something is surrendered to the Prophet without military confrontation, without participation from a Muslim army, what does that mean? That means Rasulullah becomes the sole owner of that thing. And this is mentioned in Surah Al-Hashr, Surah 59, ayah number 6. عليه من خيل ولا ركاب ولكن الله يسلط رسله على من يشاء والله على كل شيء قدير. Allah says in Surah 59, ayah number 6, what God has bestowed on his messenger from them, meaning in this case from the Jews of Fadak, for this you made no expedition with either cavalry or camelry, but God gives power to his messengers over any he pleases. So Fadak becomes the sole property of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So now Fadak is in the possession of the Prophet. All Muslims know Fadak belongs to the Prophet. Then what happens? Allah reveals an ayah in the Quran. وَآتِ ذَا الْقُرْبَى حَقَّهُ. O Muhammad, and give your nearest of kin their due right. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, he asks Jibreel, وَمَنْ ذَا الْقُرْبَى Ya Jibreel, وَمَا حَقُّهُ. Who is meant by my nearest of kin, and what is their due right? Jibreel, and this is mentioned in many of the books of tafsir, even in the books of the Sunni tafasir, Jibreel says, اِعْطِ فَاطِمَةَ فَدَكَ. Give Fadak to Fatima. Now why? Why is the Prophet instructed to do this? So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he summons Fatima and he says that Fatima, Fadak belongs to me. I am gifting it to you. Fatima al-Zahra says, Ya Rasulullah, what am I going to do with Fadak? Fatima al-Zahra has no interest in property or in money. She says, what am I going to do with it? Listen to this. This is a narration where the Prophet says, and this shows you the wisdom behind why Fadak was given to Fatima. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi says, كَانَ لِأُمُّكِ عَلَىٰ أَبِيكِ مَهْرٍ وَأَنَّ أَبَاكِ قَدْ جَعَلَ فَدَكًا لَكِ بِذَلِكَ. Fadak, giving you Fadak, O Fatima, is to honor your mother Khadija. Salamullahi alayha. That I was not able to pay her back for financing this religion, for supporting me with all of her wealth. And I was not able to give her her mahr. You see, brothers and sisters, many of these Muslims who joined Islam and they're praying and they're fasting and they're reading Quran, maybe many of them forgot that they would not be Muslims if it wasn't for the wealth and the sacrifice of Khadija. People forget, but Allah doesn't forget. People may not appreciate your efforts, but Allah appreciates the efforts of the pious. So, O Fatima, since you are the only surviving descendant of Khadija, I cannot give Khadija Fadak to repay her for what she has given to Islam. I give it to you. I give Fadak to you. Now, Fadak, brothers and sisters, was a property, was an orchard, a farmland that used to generate a lot of revenue. So Khaybar was conquered. Khaybar and Fadak were conquered, were taken in the year 7th after the Hijrah. So this is 4 years before the death of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, when you look at the narrations mention different amounts regarding the revenue that Fadak used to generate. Some narrations mention tens of thousands of dinars. Dinars are gold coins. The highest number that we see is approximately 250,000 dinars annually produced by Fadak. So this is the revenue. And just to give you an idea of what we're talking, because some of us, we don't really understand how dinars translate into, our currency today. But let me put it to you this way. When you look at the historical accounts, after Fatima Zahra delivered her Fadak sermon, Abu Bakr was inclined and he was preparing to give it back to her because he didn't have an argument against Fatima. But who prevented him? Umar ibn al-Khattab prevented Abu Bakr from returning Fadak to Fatima. And do you know what the reason was? Umar ibn al-Khattab says to Abu Bakr, how will we fund the military? How will we fund our military expeditions? I don't know how it is around the world, but we know in the United States, how much money did they spend on defense? So that just gives you an idea of how much money we're talking. So the Prophet ﷺ, he transfers ownership of Fadak to Fatima. But how does he do it? He summons witnesses, and this is what makes the confiscation of Fadak a tragedy. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in his life. So a common misconception is that Fatima inherited Fadak. No, Fatima Zahra was given Fadak during the lifetime of the Prophet. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he summons witnesses, people to witness that Fadak belongs to the Prophet and it is now being transferred to Fatima Zahra. So who are the witnesses to this transaction, this transfer of ownership from Rasulullah to Lady Fatima? Number one, Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib. And if there was no one other than Ali ibn Abi Talib, it would suffice. Aliyun ma'al haqq wal haqqu ma'ali. Ali is with the truth and the truth is with Ali. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, what does he say to the Prophet? Say to the disbelievers, قُلْ كَفَى بِاللَّهِ شَهِيدًا بَيْنِي وَبَيْنَكُمْ وَمَنْ عِنْدَهُ عِلْمُ الْكِتَابِ. Allah tells the Prophet, tell these disbelievers that if you disbelieve, if you reject me, it is sufficient for me that Allah is my witness and the one who has knowledge of the book. If Allah considers that the testimony of Ali to be sufficient, that something is haqq, You need more witnesses than Ali ibn Abi Talib that Fadak belongs to Fatima? This is number one. A second witness is, of course, Fatima Zahra herself. The same Fatima who the Prophet used to say, Fatima bad'atun minni. Fatima is a part of me. Man aghdabaha faqad aghdabani. Yarda Allah lirda Fatima. Wa yaghdab li ghadabiha. Fatima is, when God is angry when Fatima is angry. And He's pleased when she is pleased. Hassan and Hussein, they're witnesses. But of course, they're all dismissed. You know, the first and the second, they say that the second, he says that Ali is, of course, he's going to side with his wife, as if Ali ibn Abi Talib is just some average guy who's just going to agree, support his wife with whatever she does. Hassan and Hussein are kids, they're children. They're kids. Rasulullah says Hassan and Hussein are Sayyida Shababi Ahl al-Jannah. But to these individuals, they're just kids. Ayman. Do you know who Ayman is? Ayman was, she was the slave of Abdullah, the Prophet's father. She became the foster mother of the Prophet. After the Prophet lost his mother, Amina, it was Ayman who was looking after the Prophet. And the Prophet ﷺ says that Ayman is from among the women of paradise. You have Amir al-Mu'mineen as a witness. You have Fatima Zahra, Sayyidat Nisa al-Alameen. You have Sayyida Shababi Ahl al-Jannah, Hassan and Hussein as witnesses. You have Ayman, who the Prophet says she is one of the women of paradise. And then you have the irony of ironies. Do you know who's the next witness? Asma bint Umays. Asma bint Umays was the wife of Ja'far ibn Abi Talib. When Ja'far dies, when he's martyred in the Battle of Mu'tah, Asma bint Umays, she marries Abu Bakr. So Asma bint Umays testifies that Fatima is the owner of Fadak and Asma is the wife of Abu Bakr. I mean, talk about a damning testimony. The wife of Abu Bakr testifies against him that, yes, I was there, I was a witness to the transfer. So you have all of these witnesses, but one after the other, they're dismissed. And Fadak, brothers and sisters, as we've mentioned, used to generate a lot of revenue to the point where many poor people, many poor families used to depend on. Fatima Zahra had employees. She'd hired people to cultivate the land, and she used to support tens and tens and tens, if not hundreds of poor families. They would wait to receive a stipend from the revenue of Fadak. It was the Prophet gave this to Fatima so it could be an economic backbone to the Ahlul Bayt, because the Prophet knew, he knew that his words would not be honored. So he wanted to essentially create a parallel government, right? Because for the Ahlul Bayt to continue their mission, they need funding. So if Khadija funded Islam, if she funded the propagation of Islam, Rasulullah gives Fadak to Fatima to fund the preservation of Islam. And this is why Fadak is important. And those who came after the Prophet, they knew this. They knew how important it was to cut off the economic power of the Ahlul Bayt. And if you look at the world today, when superpowers want to cripple any country, what do? They impose sanctions. They cut off their economic lifeline 2 to 3 days after the first one comes to power, they confiscate Fadak. They confiscate Fadak. They dismiss the employees, the workers. Fadak was in Fatima Zahra's possession. So why is Fadak important? Because Fadak was a clear instance of oppression. And through Fadak, this is why Fatima Zahra is so adamant about Fadak. Because Fadak was her way of exposing the munafiqeen that were hidden during the lifetime of the Prophet. Some people get sensitive about these issues. Munafiqeen, there's an entire surah in the Quran, Surah Al-Munafiqun, the chapter of the hypocrites. If there were only one or two munafiqeen, why you think Allah would spend so many, would reveal an entire surah and spend tens and tens of ayat in the Quran, if not hundreds, speaking about the danger of munafiqeen? They were surrounding the Prophet. There were many hypocrites. What happened to them after the death of the Prophet? Did the earth swallow them? Did they fly away? What happened to them? They were there. And Fatima Zahra, she uncovered their faces. And Fatimiyah, this is why Fatimiyah is so important. Because Fatimiyah forces us to confront one of the most painful realities of the early history of Islam. And that is the illegitimacy of the governments that rose after the Prophet. This is the Shi'i narrative. Some people don't like it. That's life. Shias also don't like it when other Muslims call Abu Talib a kafir. We respect your right to have that opinion, and we have to be respected for our opinion. We have a right to speak about our history and our narrative. And of course, we do it in a respectful and in an intellectual and an academic way. Now, what's interesting, and inshallah we'll conclude with this, is that Fatima Zahra, and this is why it's such a difficult topic to speak about. Fatima Zahra created a theological nightmare for her opponents. What do I mean by this? Fatima Zahra put a question mark on the legitimacy of the first. Why? Why do I say this? And if you put a question mark on the legitimacy of the first, if you assert that the first is illegitimate, that means the second is illegitimate. Because the second was appointed by the first. And then the third becomes illegitimate. And all of the dominoes fall, as they say. So how does Fatima Zahra create a theological nightmare for her opponents? It's very simple. All Muslims unanimously agree that the Prophet said, "Man mata wa lam ya'rif imam zamane, mata mitatan jahiliya." He who dies without knowing the imam of the time dies the death of jahiliyyah. Now, what does it mean to know? It means to obey. It's not enough to just know the name. Man mata wa lam ya'rif. Whoever doesn't recognize, doesn't accept the imam of the time dies the death of jahiliyyah. So we come to Fatima Zahra. We come to Fatima Zahra now. If you say that the first is the imam of the time, meaning he's legitimate, Fatima Zahra did not give allegiance to him. She did not recognize him. So you have a decision now. If you say the first is legitimate, that means you're implying that Fatima died The death of ignorance. You're assuming that she didn't recognize the Imam of her time and she died mitatan jahiliyyah. Would any Muslim dare to say this? Rasulullah says, Fatima Sayyidat Nisa al-Alameen. So what is the alternative? I leave that for you to reflect on. And indeed, we mentioned that Fatima al-Zahra delivered 2 public sermons. The first was al-Khutbah al-Fadakiyah, but she also delivered another sermon to the women of the Muhajirin and the Ansar who came to visit her when she became ill in her last days. And during those last days, my dear brothers and sisters, you see that Fatima al-Zahra, she spent a lot of time with her children. Can you imagine? 18 years old, the daughter of the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and she's preparing to farewell her children. The narrations say that on the last day of her life, Asma bint Umays was with Fatima in her home, and Fatima al-Zahra bathed Hassan and Hussein. She gave them special attention, and she requested that they go with their father to the masjid. She didn't want them to be there and witness the moment that her soul departed her body. She says to them, O Hassan and Hussein, اخرجا خلف أبيكما علي للمسجد. O Hassan and Hussein, follow your father to the masjid, accompany him. Hassan and Hussein, Amir al-Mu'mineen, they leave the house. Fatima al-Zahra, she turns to Asma. She says, Ya Asma, I have yet to perform my nawafil. I'm going to go in my room to perform my nawafil. As long as you hear me reciting, know that I am okay. If you hear a sudden silence, if you don't hear me reciting, call upon me. If I respond to you, I'm okay. But if I don't respond, know that I have been reunited with my father, Rasulullah. Fatima al-Zahra, she goes into the room. She recites. Asma, she can hear the voice of Lady Fatima alayhi salam reciting the Quran, reciting dhikr, until suddenly she doesn't hear any recitation coming from that room. So she calls out, Ya Zahra, there is no answer. Ya Sayyidat al-Nisa, there is no answer. Ya al-Hasan wal-Hussein. A third time she calls out to her, O mother of Hassan and Hussein. There is no answer. Asma then goes into the room. She finds Lady Fatima alayhi salam laying on the ground. She's in prostration, but her soul has departed her body. After a short while, you see at this moment, Hassan and Hussein, they enter the house. The first thing that these 2 young boys ask Asma, the first thing, they walk into the house and they say, Assalamu alaykum, Ya Asma, ayna ummuna Fatima. They say, Oh Asma, where is our mother Fatima? Asma, for a moment she panics, she doesn't know what to do. She says to Hassan and Hussein, sit down, let me prepare some food for you. Hassan and Hussein, they sit down. Asma brings some food to the boys. When she presents the food to them, when she puts the food in front of them, Hassan looks at the face of Hussein. They look at each other and then they look at Asma. They say to her, Ya Asma, min ayn alimti annana na'kul wa ummuna Fatima laysat ma'ana. Oh Asma, when have you ever seen us eat without our mother Fatima? فأحس قلب الحسين بالشر. At that moment, Hussein felt that something awful had happened. Him and his brother Al-Hassan, they run into the room that their mother used to pray in. When they enter the room, they see their mother Fatima on the ground. The two boys throw themselves on their mother. Hassan is on the chest of his mother. Hussein he's kissing the feet of his mother Fatima. The narrations say that they cry out. Imam al-Hussein is kissing the feet of Fatima. He says to her, Ya Ummah, ana azizuk al-Hussein. Oh, my mother Fatima, I am your beloved Hussein. The other says, Ya Ummah, kallimini qabla khuruj ruhi min badani. Oh, my mother Fatima, speak to me before my soul leaves my body. Hassan and Hussein, they run to the masjid. They go to give the news to their father, Amir al-Mu'mineen. Amir al-Mu'mineen, he sees Hassan and Hussein crying, and they enter the masjid and they cry out, Ya Abata, laqad matat ummuna Fatima. Oh, our father, our mother Fatima has died. When Amir al-Mu'mineen hears that Fatima has passed on, he collapses and he faints and he falls on the ground. Imagine, brothers and sisters, Amir al-Mu'mineen. Amir al-Mu'mineen, who was never brought to his knees by even the most ferocious warriors. His legs cannot carry him when he hears about the death of Fatima. La hawla wa la قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to bless us and guide us and illuminate our hearts with the teachings of Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to give us the tawfiq to visit the holy city of Medina, to breathe the same air that Lady Fatima alayhi salam used to breathe, to walk on the same earth that she used to walk on, and to be at least in the same city that carries her blessed body. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal, most importantly, to make us, even though we are undeserving, to make us among those who receive the shafa'ah, the intercession of Fatimatul Zahra on the day of judgment. يوم لا ينفع مال ولا بنون إلا من أتى الله بقلب سليم. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطاهرين. اللهم صل
جاری رہے تم اگر ذاکر شبیر ہو یہ یاد رہے چاہے اس غم کے لیے سر بھی کٹے گھر بھی جلے حرمت فرش عزا جان سے پیاری رہے ہم رہے یا نہ رہے یہ عزاداری رہے ہائے شمع سے شمع جلے سلسلہ جاری رہے ہم رہے یا نہ رہے یہ عزاداری رہے یہ سبیلے یوں ہی آباد رہے لہذا اور گھر گھر پہ نظر آئے علم غازی کا یہ علم اونچا رہے یہ علمداری رہے ہم رہے یا نہ رہے یہ عزاداری رہے ہائے شمع سے شمع جلے سلسلہ جاری رہے ہم رہے یا نہ رہے یہ عزاداری رہے اپنے گھر میں بھی عزا خانہ سجانا ہے مجھے اپنے بچوں کو عزادار بنانا ہے مجھے تاکہ اس نسل میں بھی تعزیہ داری رہے ہم رہے یا نہ رہے یہ عزاداری رہے ہائے شمع سے شمع جلے سلسلہ جاری رہے ہم رہے یا نہ رہے یہ عزاداری رہے مجلس شاہ کی زندہ میں جو بنیاد رکھی اصل میں زینب و سجاد کی خواہش تھی یہی یہ عزادار رہے یہ عزاداری رہے ہم رہے یا نہ رہے یہ عزاداری رہے ہائے شمع سے شمع جلے سلسلہ جاری رہے ہم رہے یا نہ رہے یہ عزاداری رہے ہائے شمع سے شمع جلے سلسلہ جاری رہے ہم رہے یا نہ رہے یہ عزاداری رہے سورۃ مبارکۃ الفاتحہ
Just a quick announcement, refreshments will be served in the parking lot. To-go niyaz will be served while the cars are driving out of the property. Refreshments will be served in the parking lot. The to-go niyaz will be served while people are exiting from the center. Ziyarat.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد السلام عليك يا وارث آدم صفوة الله السلام عليك يا وارث نوح النبي الله السلام عليك يا وارث إبراهيم خليل الله السلام عليك يا وارث موسى كليم الله السلام عليك يا وارث عيسى روح الله. السلام عليك يا وارث محمد حبيب الله. السلام عليك يا وارث أمير المؤمنين ولي الله. السلام عليك يا ابن محمد المصطفى. السلام عليك يا ابن علي المرتضى. السلام عليك يا ابن فاطمة الزهراء. السلام عليك يا ابن خديجة الكبرى. السلام عليك يا ثار الله وابن ثاره والوتر الموتور. أشهد أنك قد أقمت الصلاة وآتيت الزكاة وأمرت بالمعروف ونهيت عن المنكر وأطعت الله ورسوله حتى أتاك اليقين. فلعن الله أمة قتلتك ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك ولعن الله أمة سميت بذلك فرضيت به. يا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله أشهد أنك كنت نورا في الأسلاب الشامخة والأرحام المطهرة لم تنجسك الجاهلية بأنجاسها ولم تلبسك من متلهمات ثيابها. وأشهد أنك من دعائم الدين وأركان المؤمنين. وأشهد أنك الإمام البر التقي الرضي الزكي الهادي المهدي. وأشهد أن الأئمة من ولدك كلمة التقوى وأعلام الهدى والعروة الوثقى والحجة على أهل الدنيا. وأشهد الله وملائكته وأنبياءه ورسله أني بكم مؤمن وبيا بكم موقن بشراع ديني وخواتين أعمالي وقلبي لقلبكم سلم وأمري لأمركم متبع. صلوات الله عليكم وعلى أرواحكم وعلى أجسادكم وعلى أجسامكم وعلى شاهدكم وعلى غائبكم وعلى ظاهركم وعلى باطنكم. السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله. السلام عليك يا ابن نبي الله. السلام عليك يا ابن أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا ابن الحسين الشهيد. السلام عليك أيها الشهيد وابن الشهيد. السلام عليك أيها المظلوم وابن المظلوم. لعن الله أمة قتلتك ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك ولعن الله أمة سميت بذلك فرضيت به. السلام عليكم يا أولياء الله وأحباءه. السلام عليكم يا أصفياء الله وأوداءه. السلام عليكم يا أنصار دين الله. السلام عليكم يا أنصار رسول الله. السلام عليكم يا أنصار أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليكم يا أنصار فاطمة سيدة نساء العالمين. السلام عليكم يا أنصار أبي محمد الحسن بن علي الولي الزكي الناصح. السلام عليكم يا أنصار أبي عبد الله بأبي أنتم وأمي طبتم وطابت الأرض التي فيها دفنتم وفزتم فوزا عظيما. فيا ليتني كنت معكم فأفوز معكم. السلام عليك يا أبا الفضل العباس ابن أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا ابن سيد الوصيين. السلام عليك يا ابن أول القوم إسلاما وأقدمهم إيمانا وأقومهم بدين الله وأحوتهم على الإسلام. أشهد لقد نصحت لله ولرسوله ولأخيك فنعم الأخ المواسي. فلعن الله أمة قتلتك ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك ولعن الله أمة استهلت منك المهارم وانتهكت حرمة الإسلام. فنعم الصابر المجاهد المهام الناصر والأخ الدافع عن أخيه المجيب إلى طاعته الرب الراغب فيما زهد فيه غيره من الثواب الجزيل والثناء الجميل. وألحقك الله بدرجة آبائك في جنات النعيم. السلام عليك على تسعة المعصومين من ذرية علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والحجة بن الحسن. عجل الله فرجه وسهل الله مخرجه وظهورك ورحمة الله وبركاته. سورة المباركة الفاتحة.